What, where, how, and when? Hey everyone. Welcome to IAS Study Space. Today we're diving into the very first chapter of our PASTS one called What, Where, How, and When. This chapter basically answers one big question: how do we even know what happened thousands of years ago? Let's break it down like detectives. Rashida's question. So, the chapter starts with a girl named Rashida. She's reading a newspaper and sees a headline saying, 100 years ago. That makes her wonder, how can anyone know what happened so long ago? And honestly, that's the same question historians ask. How do we know what life was like thousands of years ago when there were no newspapers, no internet, no cameras? That curiosity, that's where history begins. Finding out what happened. If we want to know what happened yesterday, easy. We can check the news, scroll through social media, or ask someone who saw it. But what about thousands of years ago? There were no witnesses alive, no photos, no TikToks, nothing. So historians depend on sources, things people left behind, writings, buildings, tools, even bones. Each of these things becomes a clue to reconstruct the past, like solving a mystery. What can we know about the past? Now, what kind of things can we actually find out? Well, a lot: what people ate, the clothes they wore, the houses they lived in. We can even know about the kinds of work they did: hunters, farmers, rulers, merchants, priests, craftspeople, artists, musicians, scientists, all part of the story. We can even figure out what children did for fun, the games they played, the songs they sang. Basically, the past isn't just about kings and wars, it's about ordinary people too. Where did people live? Now let's talk geography. Where did people actually live? The earliest people lived along rivers because rivers gave them water, food, and fertile soil. For example, the Nirmada Valley, one of the oldest inhabited regions. People here were gatherers, collecting roots, fruits, and hunting animals. Sulayman and Kurthar Hills, in today's Pakistan region, where farming began around 8,000 years ago. People started growing wheat and barley, and domesticating animals like goats and sheep. Garo Hills in the northeast and Vindhyas in central India, also early farming zones. Indus and Ganga valleys, where the first cities and kingdoms developed later. If you look at a map of India, you'll see all these areas forming the early centers of human civilization. Movement and travel. Humans have always been travelers. Back then, people moved for survival, looking for food, escaping floods or droughts, or finding new pastures for their animals. Merchants traveled to trade goods. Kings traveled to conquer lands. Religious teachers walked from village to village, spreading ideas and stories. And some people just traveled for adventure, to discover what lay beyond. Because of all this movement, people exchanged ideas, languages, and cultures. That's how our traditions and beliefs got mixed and evolved over time. Names of the land. Now let's talk about our country's name, India and Bharat. The name India actually comes from the river Indus, which was called Sindhu in Sanskrit. Foreigners who came through the northwest, like the Iranians and Greeks about 2,500 years ago, couldn't pronounce Sindhu, so they said Hindus or Indos, and that became India. The name Bharat comes from the ancient tribes mentioned in the Rig Veda, which was composed about 3,500 years ago. So even the name of our land has a long story behind it. Finding out about the past, the sources. To know about the past, historians rely on sources, and there are mainly three types. First, manuscripts. These are ancient handwritten books, written on palm leaves or birch bark. They talk about everything: religion, science, kings, medicine, even drama and poems. Some were in Sanskrit, others in Prakrit or Tamil. Second, inscriptions. These are writings engraved on stone or metal, like government notices of ancient times. Kings used them to announce victories, rules, or messages to the public. For example, the famous inscriptions of Ashoka, written about 2,250 years ago, found in places like Kandahar, Afghanistan, in Greek and Aramaic. Third, archaeological finds. Objects like pots, tools, weapons, ornaments, and coins, even bones, tell us about how people lived. Archaeologists dig them out from beneath the ground and study them like detectives. Who studies the past? Now, who does all this detective work? Two kinds of experts: historians and archaeologists. Historians read and interpret manuscripts and inscriptions. Archaeologists dig and study physical remains: bones, pottery, tools, coins, ruins of houses or temples. Together, they piece together the story of human civilization. One past or many. The book is called Our Pasts. Notice the plural. That's because there isn't just one history. Different groups had different experiences. Farmers, herders, kings, merchants, artists, all lived differently. For example, the life of a king was not the same as that of a farmer or a craftsperson. Even today, people in Andaman Islands live differently from those in cities, and that was true in ancient times too. Dates and time. When we talk about the past, we need a timeline. Most of the world uses a system based on the birth of Jesus Christ. BC stands for before Christ, the years before his birth. AD stands for Anno Domini, meaning in the year of our Lord. So 2000 AD means 2000 years after Christ's birth. Nowadays we also use BCE, before Common Era, and CE, Common Era. Same idea but more neutral terms. Historians use these systems to track when things happened, to connect events across different parts of the world. Deciphering the past. Now here's the tricky part. How do historians read old scripts they don't understand? This process is called decipherment. One of the most famous examples is the Rosetta Stone from Egypt. It had the same message written in 3 scripts, Greek and 2 forms of Egyptian. Scholars compared the Greek with Egyptian and cracked the code, figuring out which symbol stood for which sound. That's how they began reading ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, unlocking an entire lost language. So, to wrap up, history is not just about memorizing dates or kings. It's about understanding how humans lived, learned, and changed over time. From the first gatherers along the Nirmala, to farmers, city builders, and travelers. Every clue we find helps us reconstruct our story as humans. That's why this chapter is called What, Where, How, and When. It's the foundation of studying history itself. On the trail of the earliest people. You know how we use Google Maps to find places today? Well, imagine trying to trace where humans first lived not decades ago but millions of years ago. That's exactly what this chapter does. It takes us on a journey, following the trails left behind by the earliest people on our planet. Think of it like detective work, using clues like tools, bones, and cave paintings to piece together how humans first survived. Tushar's train journey. The chapter begins with a simple story. Tushar is traveling by train from Delhi to Chennai. Someone tells him trains are only about 150 years old. And that sparks a thought: before trains, before cars, before roads, how did people move around? Did they just stay in one place? Of course not. The earliest humans were always on the move because survival depended on it. So the journey that begins in Tushar's train becomes a journey back in time, to when movement wasn't for comfort, it was for life itself. The earliest people, hunter-gatherers. The earliest humans lived in the subcontinent about 2 million years ago. They didn't grow crops, didn't have houses, and definitely no supermarkets. They were hunter-gatherers, meaning they hunted wild animals and gathered fruits, nuts, roots, and seeds from forests. Just imagine, every meal depended on what you could find or catch that day. They had to know which fruits were poisonous, which animals were dangerous, and which places had water. Knowledge was survival. Why hunter-gatherers moved? These people didn't stay in one spot. They kept moving, and there were solid reasons for that. When the food in one area ran out, they had to look elsewhere. Animals they hunted moved too, so humans followed them. Fruits and plants grew in different seasons, so they had to keep track of nature's calendar. And water sources like ponds or rivers could dry up, forcing them to move again. So movement wasn't wandering, it was strategic. Every journey was about finding food, safety, and life. How do we know about them? Now you might wonder, how do we even know all this? The answer: archaeologists. They found tools and remains that tell us what life looked like then. Since most tools were made of stone, this time is called the Stone Age. That's why so many prehistoric sites are filled with stone chips and flakes. Other materials like wood or bone decayed, but stone survived, carrying silent evidence across thousands of years. Stone tools, their uses. These stone tools weren't random rocks. People shaped them for specific jobs: cutting meat and bones, scraping bark, chopping fruits, digging roots, and hunting animals. Some stones were tied to sticks, creating early versions of axes, spears, and arrows. Others were used to chop wood for fire or for building simple shelters. If you look at the images in your textbook, you can see different shapes, each telling us exactly how creative and practical these people were. Choosing a place to live. Where did these people live? Archaeologists have found sites across India. Places like Bhimbetka, Hunski, Kurnool Caves, and Murghar. Notice something common among them? Almost all are near water sources, rivers, lakes, or springs. Because water meant life. You could drink it, cook with it, and animals came there too. When you look at the map in the textbook, those little red triangles show exactly where early humans left their marks, literally the first footprints of civilization. Factory and habitation sites. Now, in some of these places, archaeologists found piles of tools and broken stones. That tells us these weren't just living areas, they were factories. A factory site is where tools were made. A habitation site is where people lived. Sometimes both were the same, habitation cum factory sites. For example, in Bhimbetka, Madhya Pradesh, there are caves that were homes, and nearby open areas full of stone flakes. Their workshop floor 10,000 years old. Making stone tools. How did they make these tools? 2 main techniques. The first was stone on stone, striking one stone against another to chip off flakes and shape it. The second, more advanced, was pressure flaking. Placing a piece of bone or wood on the edge of a stone and pressing until small flakes came off. These were the first technologies humans invented. The foundation for everything from smartphones to spaceships. Discovering fire. One of the biggest breakthroughs came when humans discovered fire. In the Kurnool Caves, archaeologists found ashes, proof that people knew how to use fire. Imagine what that meant. Warmth during cold nights, light in the dark, safety from wild animals, and for the first time, cooked food. Fire wasn't just a discovery. It was power. Changed everything. A changing environment. Around 12,000 years ago, the world's climate warmed up after the Ice Age. Grasslands spread out, and animals like deer, goats, and cattle became more common. Humans noticed this and started following these animals. Slowly, they learned how to tame them. They also began to notice that some plants grew from seeds, and that idea led to the beginning of farming. The earth was changing, and humans were learning to change with it. Names and dates. Archaeologists call these periods based on the tools people used. Paleolithic Age, the Old Stone Age, 2 million to 12,000 years ago. Mesolithic Age, the Middle Stone Age, 12,000 to 10,000 years ago. Neolithic Age, the New Stone Age after 10,000 years ago. In the Mesolithic period, they made tiny razor-sharp stone tools called microliths, small but deadly efficient. Evolution wasn't just biological, it was technological. Rock paintings. Now let's talk about something stunning: rock paintings. In caves like Bimbetka, you can still see paintings made thousands of years ago. They show animals, people dancing, hunting scenes, moments from daily life. And they weren't using paint from a shop. They made colors from minerals, ash, and plant juices. These paintings tell us something profound. Even when survival was tough, humans found time to create, to express, to feel. Division of work. We don't know exactly how tasks were divided, but it's likely that both men and women hunted, gathered, and made tools. There was no strict division of labor. Everyone's contribution mattered. This was long before societies built hierarchies. Survival made everyone equal. Ostriches in India. Here's a fascinating find. In Patni, Maharashtra, archaeologists discovered ostrich eggshells. Not only that, they found shells with beautiful engraved designs, and even beads made from them. It proves that these early humans weren't just surviving, they were creating art and perhaps even jewelry. They understood beauty. A closer look: Hunski. Let's zoom into one site. Hunski in Karnataka. Archaeologists found hundreds of tools here, most made of limestone, which was easy to shape. They chose spots close to springs, again showing how carefully they selected places to live. Imagine a group sitting by a spring, making tools, cooking meat over fire. That's what life looked like 20,000 years ago in Hunski. Elsewhere, cave paintings in France. And it wasn't just India. In France, cave paintings made about 10,000 to 20,000 years ago show animals like horses, bison, and reindeer. The artists used minerals and charcoal to draw, deep inside caves. Many historians believe these paintings were part of rituals or prayers, maybe before a big hunt. So even without language, humans were already communicating ideas through art. Recap: the legacy of the earliest people. When you look at all this fire, tools, paintings, movement, you realize something. The earliest humans weren't primitive brutes, they were pioneers. They adapted, learned, and created. Every step they took brought us closer to civilization. The story of early humans isn't just about survival. It's about discovery, creativity, and the first sparks of human intelligence. From gathering to growing food. Imagine a time when humans didn't know what farming even was. They survived by hunting animals and gathering fruits and roots. But one small discovery, how a seed could grow into a plant, changed the entire course of human history. Today we're diving into that story. The story of how humans went from gathering to growing food. Nanyuo's lunch, our starting point. Let's begin with a girl named Nanyuo. She's sitting down to eat her favorite meal. Boiled rice, squash, pumpkin, beans, and meat. Everything on her plate is fresh, grown in her family's small garden in Nagaland. But when she traveled to Madhya Pradesh, she noticed something interesting. The food there tasted totally different, spicier and new. That difference tells us something big. The food people eat depends on the plants and animals that grow or live in that region. And that's exactly how our story begins. Variety of foods. Different plants and animals grow in different conditions. For example, rice needs plenty of water, so you'll find it in areas with heavy rainfall, like eastern India. Wheat and barley, on the other hand, need drier climates, perfect for the northwestern plains. Even animals have preferences. Sheep and goats do well in dry, hilly regions, but cattle thrive on open grasslands. So, as people began settling in different environments, their food habits began to vary. That's why Nanyuo's meal was different from the one in Madhya Pradesh. The birth of farming. Long ago, as the Earth's climate became warmer after the Ice Age, people noticed something fascinating. When fruits fell from trees, the seeds sometimes sprouted and grew into new plants. People started wondering, what if they planted these seeds on purpose? So they began protecting certain spots, watering them, and waiting for the plants to grow. And that's how the first farmers were born, not overnight, but through observation, patience, and curiosity. The first herders. Now, plants weren't the only ones getting attention. Humans started noticing that some animals were friendlier than others. They began leaving bits of food near their shelters to attract them. The first animal to be tamed was the dog, probably because it guarded camps, warned of danger, and even helped in hunting. Soon, people began taming other gentle animals, like sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs. By protecting these animals from wild beasts and feeding them, humans became herders. They no longer had to rely only on hunting. Domestication, the big turning point. This process of growing plants and taming animals under human care is called domestication. People started selecting only the best seeds and healthiest animals. For example, they chose plants that gave larger grains or didn't fall easily, and animals that were gentle and strong. Over generations, these selected plants and animals changed. They became quite different from their wild ancestors. Look at the example from your book, the teeth of a wild pig versus a domesticated pig. The wild one's teeth are sharper and larger, built for defense, while the domesticated ones are smaller because it no longer needed to fight for survival. This change didn't happen in a few years, it took thousands. First domesticated species. Domestication began around 12,000 years ago. Some of the first plants to be domesticated were wheat and barley, and the first animals were sheep and goats. One of the earliest places where this happened was Mehrgarh, in what is now Pakistan. Mehrgarh is super important. It's one of the first known farming villages in the world. A new way of life. Think about it. Once you start farming, you can't just pack up and leave every few days like hunters did. You need to stay to water your plants, protect them from birds, and wait for them to ripen. That meant people began living in one place for longer periods. They had to figure out how to store grain safely, since grain could feed them through dry seasons. So they invented new things, clay pots, woven baskets, and pits in the ground to store food. And that's how villages slowly started forming. Storing animals. Animals also became a kind of storage. A herd of goats or cows could give milk, meat, and even help plow the land. So animals weren't just food, they were wealth. A family with more animals was better prepared for hard times. In a way, animals were the first kind of bank humans ever had. Finding the first farmers and herders. How do we even know all this? Because archaeologists found clues, grains, bones, and even burnt seeds from ancient sites. They tell us which crops were grown and which animals were tamed. Some examples from your book. Mehrgarh, Pakistan. Wheat, barley, sheep, goat, cattle. Koldua, UP. Rice and animal bones. Burzaham, Kashmir. Wheat, lentil, dog, buffalo. Halar and Payampally, Andhra Pradesh. Millet, sheep, pig. These discoveries tell us farming was spreading across India towards a settled life. In Burzaham, archaeologists found pit houses, homes dug into the ground with steps leading inside. These gave warmth in cold weather. They also found hearths for cooking, both inside and outside homes. By now, stone tools had become sharper and smoother. This period is called the Neolithic Age. People also used mortars and pestles to grind grain just like we do today. And yes, pots appeared. People made earthen pots to cook, store, and even decorate. They also began weaving cloth using materials like cotton. Life was becoming more comfortable, more organized. Change took time. Farming didn't spread instantly. For thousands of years, some groups still hunted and gathered while others farmed. Some even did both, farming in one season, herding in another. Change was slow, uneven, and full of trial and error. Life in tribes. Early farmers and herders lived in groups called tribes. Each tribe was like a large family, 2 or 3 generations living together. There were no kings or rich-poor divisions. Everyone shared land, water, and food. Women usually did most of the farming, preparing land, sowing, harvesting. Men looked after herds or made tools. Children guarded fields and animals. And life wasn't all work. They sang, danced, painted, and celebrated festivals together. This was the beginning of community life. Mehrgarh, living and dying. Back to Mehrgarh. Archaeologists found remains of houses, rectangular with multiple rooms, and grains of wheat and barley. They also found animal bones, which show a gradual change. Early layers had wild animals, later ones had domestic ones like goats and cattle. And when people died, they buried them carefully. In one burial, a person was buried with goats. Perhaps they believed the goats would help them in the next world. This shows that even in early farming communities, humans had beliefs and emotions. Archaeological layers telling time. When archaeologists dig a site, how do they know which part is older? They look at layers. The deeper the layer, the older it is. Imagine people building houses on the same spot for centuries, each time leaving behind a little waste, broken pots, ashes. Over hundreds of years, it forms a mound. So, when they dig, the bottom layers show the oldest lifestyles, and the upper layers show newer, more advanced ones. That's how we read the story of the past. Deojali Hating, the Eastern Connection. In the Brahmaputra Valley, archaeologists discovered a site called Deojali Hating. They found stone mortars, pestles, and jadeite, a green stone that had to come from China. That means people here were already trading with distant regions. Even back then, humans were explorers and traders, connecting India with places like China and Myanmar. The global picture. While all this was happening in India, similar farming communities were growing around the world. In Turkey, at a place called Katalhuyuk, people were also settling down, growing crops and exchanging goods like cowries, shells, and stones. There were no carts yet. Everything was carried by people or pack animals. The human story of farming was truly global. Imagine. Now imagine you're a Neolithic farmer. You have a small piece of land. What will you grow? How will you protect your crops from animals or drought? Where will you store your grain? And when the rains fail, who will you share food with? These are the same questions early humans faced thousands of years ago, and their answers shape the world we live in today. If this video helped your UPSC prep, like, share, and subscribe to IAS Study Space. Turn on the bell icon so you don't miss the next class. Thank you for watching the video.